أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. الحمد لله ثم الصلاة والسلام على اللهم صل على محمد الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة الله تعالى كان شر أريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Sunni commentators of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Insan, especially verses 5. Of the Quran, historians, traditional, that was concerned about their health. The Prophet actually came to the house of Ali and Fatemah with a group of his companions to visit the two Sahaba. He suggested that you should make a nadhr for their. So Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, he makes a nadhr. And in fact, Hassan and Hussein, they also make a vow that if they recover from their sickness, they will fast consecutively for 3 days. They will fast for 3 consecutive days. Now the narrations report that after a very short period of time, Hassan and Hussein alayhimus salam, they recover. And therefore, in order to fulfill their nadhr, the entire family. Now, Imam Ali and their resources were very limited. In fact, when they began fasting, some narrations say that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib had to go and borrow. He had to go borrow barley. Can you imagine? Food. Is it because Ali ibn Abi Talib is poor? Ali ibn Abi Talib was not poor. But the family of the Prophet, you know, they were high in production, but they were very low in consumption. Whenever they would earn money, they would think about giving it to people who are in need. And in many cases, they would go hungry. So when they begin their fast, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, he borrows some barley. He brings it home. And Fatemah Zahra, on the first day, she takes Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, he goes to the masjid to pray Salatul Maghrib with the Prophet. And he returns, and they're about to have their iftar. What is their iftar? Their iftar is some Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they were breaking their fast on bread, a few loaves of bread and water. As they're about, Fatemah Zahra prepares their bread. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib brings out the food. He spreads out the food. There is someone at the door. There's a man standing at the door. Assalamu alaikum ya Ahl Bayt Muhammad. Peace be upon you, O family of Muhammad. Miskinun min masakin al-Muslimin. At'imuni. Give me some food. O family of the Prophet, I am poor. At'amakumullah min mawa'id al-Jannah. Give me some food and I ask Allah to grant you the food of paradise. So there's one man at the door. How many loaves of bread? There's a loaf for Hassan, a loaf for Hussein. There's a loaf for Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. Let's say that minimum there are 4 loaves of bread. Minimum. They could have given 1 loaf to this and say, you take one and we keep three. They could have said, listen, we split it. You take. Ali ibn Abi Talib, she gives her loaf. Even Hassan and Hussein, these children, needs food in the upcoming days. And can you imagine, you and I, if consider yourself very generous if you donate your iftar and you say, they break their fast on water. So now you go another day. They have to continue fulfilling the nadr. The next day, they're fasting and they hadn't had food since the previous. The same scenario, 2/3 of the flour. She makes some. Ibn Abi Talib returns from the masjid. They're about to break their iftar. The family of Muhammad. أنا يتيم من أولاد المهاجرين. I am an orphan. Wastur was a shaheed. He gave his life alongside the Prophet. أطعى من موائد الجنة. That I'm an orphan from the children of the Muhajirin. My father was a shaheed. He was a martyr. They take all of the loaves of bread. You know, it's one thing to do it the first time. Now this is the second day. You would think that this time, because they haven't eaten, they'll only give half or a third. They give it all, including Hassan and Hussein, who are children. How do you think Hassan and Hussein developed the spirit of generosity? Because they were looking up to Ali ibn Abi Talib, their father, Fatemah Azhar. They grew up in a house of generosity. And this shows you when parents are generous, when they're pious, these virtues can be instilled at a very young age in children. So they break their fast on what? Water. 2 days. Allahu Akbar. Really? Can you imagine? No food for 2 days, only water. They fast the 3rd day. Fatemah Azhar takes the remaining 1/3, makes it into flour, she bakes bread. Ali ibn Abi Talib comes home. They're about to break their iftar, and but this time, who is this? So the first night, there was miskeen, a poor Muslim. The second night, it was an orphan Muslim. The third night, Assalamu alaikum ya ahl bayt Muhammad. Peace be upon you, O family of Muhammad. Atu'assiruna wa la tut'imuna. Do you take us as war prisoners and you don't feed us? I am one of the war prisoners of Muhammad. Meaning what? Who is this person? He's non-Muslim. Not only is he non-Muslim, in Medina, if a non-Muslim fought against the Muslims and they were captured, the Muslims would keep him in Medina and he would live with a Muslim family until they would come to some arrangement for his ransom. So he was staying with a Muslim family, and that Muslim family did not provide him food. So now you have someone who's kafir, who's a war prisoner, on the 3rd day asking Ahlul Bayt for food. Now you may say, okay, he's a non-Muslim. If we're going to let's just give him 1 loaf or half. They give it all. And this is why I remember 3 years ago we were sitting with Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli. He says the 3rd night was the most marvelous act of charity, where they gave, after fasting for 3 days, they gave away all of their bread, all of their iftar to a kafir who fought against the Muslims, who is asir, who is a war prisoner. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reveals what? He reveals the verses of Surah Al-Insan, where Allah promises the food of paradise. Now, in the Quranic vision of a community, if we first thing that we have to do is what? We have to take care of the basic needs of the community. How can you teach people spirituality if they're hungry, if they don't have a shelter over their heads? if they don't have access to clean water, if their basic needs are not met. That's why when you look at Christian missionaries around the world, what do? When they arrive in a developing country, do they start Bible class? What do? They distribute food. They give water. They provide shelter. They take care of the basic needs of the people. Because when someone has a full stomach and a roof over their head, into spiritual knowledge. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. The one who Islam until you take care of these basic needs. There's a hadith from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he speaks about the basic needs, the basic rights of every member of the community. Now in Medina was a pluralistic community. In Medina there were Muslims, there were Jews, there were some Christians, there were some mushrikeen who were living in their midst. So you have this diverse community. What are the rights, the basic rights of these community members? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa he says, لَيْسَ لِبْنِ آدَمْ حَقٌّ فِي سِوَى هَذِهِ الْخِصَالِ. The Prophet mentions 4 basic human rights. You know, today in the world, we're always talking about human rights. Look at what the Prophet said about human rights 14 centuries ago. He mentions 4 things that are inalienable rights to every human being. He says, number 1, and I'll speak about each one in a little bit more detail. Baytun yaskunuhu. The first, the Prophet mentions, every community has a right to shelter. You have a right to have a roof over your head. This is not a privilege. Therefore, in an Islamic society, we're not allowed, if we want to be a true Muslim community, we're not allowed to have homeless people. We can't. We have to solve that problem. Because shelter is a human need. It's a human right. Baytun yaskunu, number 1. وَثَوْبٌ يُوَارِ عَوْرَتَهُ. The Prophet says clothing is a human right. It's a human right. It's not just a Muslim right. Anyone, even a kafir, they have a right to shelter. They have a right to clothing. وَجِلْفُ الْخُبْزِ. They have a right to bread, meaning they have a right to food. Every person has a right to food. And this is why even the enemies of Ahlul Bayt never deprived even their most fierce enemies of food. When Ibn Muljim was in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib, did Ali ibn Abi Talib say, no, we're gonna torture you. You don't get any food. In fact, Ali ibn Abi Talib would tell Hassan and Hussein, give him food before you give me food. What kind of justice is this? And the Prophet mentions what type of food? Bread. There are many types of food. Why wouldn't the Prophet mention another type of food? Why bread? You know, for those of you who have ever been on a diet, what happens when you eat salad? You don't get full, right? That's why many people can't stick to diets, right? You feel empty. If you eat fruits and vegetables and salads, you still feel like the person. Meaning, people have a right to eat until they are satiated. And then number 4, the Prophet mentions what? Al-ma', water. And inshallah we'll speak about this idea of having access to drinkable water as being a human right. Now, so these are 4 things that the Prophet mentions. Every member of the community is entitled to shelter, is entitled to clothing, is entitled to food that satiates hunger, and is entitled to drinkable water. Now this costs money. You would agree that this is going to cost money to provide all of this. The question is, where does the money come from? Who's going to pay the bill? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'arij. Because you know, sometimes people work, but they don't make enough to live. How many people in communities across the United States, across the world. They work day and night, but they cannot even afford to put a roof over their heads. They cannot afford to put food on the table. So who's responsible? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'arij, verse 24 and 25, when He describes the believers. It's a problem that has to be solved, but Allah says mu'mineen have to be at the forefront at solving this problem. Allah, when He describes the believers, usually when we read descriptions of the believers, we always think of fasting and praying and giving charity. This is one description, but what does Allah say? وَالَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. The believers, mu'mineen, recognize that in their wealth there is an acknowledged right for the beggar and for the deprived. Meaning what? Allah is telling the believers that there is a portion of your wealth that you have in your bank account that doesn't belong to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has assigned rizq to all people. And Allah has placed the rizq, the sustenance of others in your possession. So are you going to hold wal mahroom and the deprived? Now what's the difference? There are two types of poor people. There are some poor people who are so desperate. But then when Allah says wal mahroom, the deprived, sometimes we think the poor people in our community are only the ones who are begging. That if we come to the masjid or we have a community and no one is begging, that means alhamdulillah, no one is poor. This is a misconception. Not everyone who stays silent and doesn't ask is well off. There are many people, their pride and their dignity prevents them from asking. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reminds us that you don't only give to the one who asks, you have to go and find out who is in need. You have to go search, you have to check on each other. And how do you know who's in need and who's not? That means you have to have relationships with people. You have to visit each other, you have to be familiar with each other. We come to the masjid, believe me, you might come to the masjid and the person you're praying next to, you don't even know their name. Because we don't talk to each other. We come, we pray, and we leave. We live isolated lives. So we have to learn that those who are in need are not just those who are asking. We have to be familiar with the struggles and the suffering of the people in our community. And that's only going to happen if you develop a relationship with them. Now, the Prophet ﷺ begins by saying that the right of shelter, Baytun yaskunu. There was a recent study that showed that there are 150 million people around the world, and I think the figure is probably a lot higher than this. 150 million people around the world are homeless. And I think it's a lot higher than that. Brothers and sisters, 150 million people is a huge number. Even 1 million people is too much. Even one person is too much. Now when I say homeless, what comes to mind? We think of someone who's sleeping in downtown New York City. He's sleeping in the subway. He's sleeping in the street. But do you know the definition of a homeless person? A homeless person is someone who does not have permanent housing. They might be sleeping in the street. They might be sleeping at a shelter. This is not permanent housing. They might be sleeping in their cars. Yes, I've seen people in Muslim communities who literally live in their cars because they don't feel like there is a community that would help them. Or they're too embarrassed to ask, and no one asks who this person is, what's your background. We don't ask about people's lives. We don't get to know people. And people will open up to you when you make them feel comfortable. And a growing problem today is even at universities. My wife teaches at a university, and she says that I know many students, they're undergrad students, they're graduate students, but they're homeless. They're homeless. You know where they live? They live on campus. Not in a dorm. They go to class and they might sleep in the library in a corner. And if they want to eat, they go to a function at the university where they have free food. And if they want to shower, they go to the gym and they take a shower. And that's how they live. Many people are like that. They don't have homes. 14 centuries ago, now today, I have not heard any politician that says housing for public office that campaigns for housing for the homeless. Rasulullah 14 centuries ago, he was speaking about this. In fact, when the Muslims first arrived in Medina, what did the Prophet do? So he builds the masjid and he resolves the homeless problem. There was a homeless problem in Medina. You know, people when they migrated from Mecca to Medina, they're coming to Medina empty-handed. They have nothing. They're homeless. So what does the Prophet do? He solves the problem. He designates a part of the masjid as living space, as temporary housing for the homeless. Ashab al-Suffah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he treated them the same way that he treated other members of the community. He didn't make them feel like they're charity baskets. He would visit them. He would talk to them. You know, sometimes when we want to help people, we go about it the wrong way. We help people and we make them feel like they are charity baskets. We give them money and then we don't ever ask about them. Rasulullah ﷺ provided shelter to them. And he would visit them on a regular basis. And on many occasions, he would try to help them get married. He would try to help them find jobs. He cared about them. So Baytun Yaskunuhu, the Prophet mentions. And then the Prophet says, he mentions clothing. You know, brothers and sisters, when we think about the needs of the fuqara, we think that they only need food. I just give them food. We fail. You think clothing lasts forever? They need clothing. And that's why in the Islamic legal system, some of the kafarat, you know, sometimes you commit a sin and you just have to make tawbah. And there are other instances where you commit a sin, not only do you have to make tawbah, but you have to pay kafara. So for example, if you make an oath, if you say, for example, Wallahi, tomorrow I'm going to fast, a mustahab fast. You mention the name of Allah. And then you don't do it. You committed a sin, you have to ask Allah for forgiveness, and you have to pay kafara. You have to pay kafara. Because you made an oath to do something and you mentioned the name of God and you didn't do it. What is the kafara? Allah mentions it in Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 85. فَكَفَّارَتُهُ إِطْعَامُ عَشْرَةِ مَسَاكِينَ. The kafara of swearing by the name of God to do something and then you don't do it. The kafara is that you feed 10 poor people. Or you clothe them. You give them clothing. And it mentions, you know, other things. But you see here the Quran reminds us that don't think that fuqara only need food. They also need clothing. And therefore we should make it a habit. You know, especially in the, you know, when we bring out our summer clothes and our winter clothes, you know, sometimes we stop wearing certain clothes. We have many shirts and pants and dresses that we don't wear anymore. We wore them a few times and they're in the back of our closets. You should donate these articles of clothing, but don't donate them as individuals. Because if we want to establish ourselves as a Muslim community, bring them all to the masjid, collect them, and then donate all of these clothes to the poor on behalf of Al-Fatemah Islamic Center. So these organizations that receive these donations, they're receiving it from a Muslim community. We have to create a model Muslim community. So when we do acts of charity, when we perform acts of charity, instead of giving as individuals, let us start giving as communities. Because that's the way that you dispel Islamophobia, right? Where people will see that, no, Muslims are the Muslim community, they're making valuable contributions to the wider society. So the Prophet mentions housing. He mentions clothing. He mentions food. You know, brothers and sisters, you know, when we speak about food, we mentioned in the beginning of the lecture the story of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. You know, there's a beautiful hadith from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, Utul ajsad at-ta'am. The nourishment for your body is food. If you don't eat food, you're going to get sick. You're not going to be healthy. وَقُوتُ الْأَرْوَاحِ الْإِطْعَامِ. But the nourishment for your soul also needs nourishment. The nourishment of your soul is to feed people, to feed other people. So in the same way, if you don't eat food, your body's going to suffer. If you don't feed people, if you're not a charitable person, it's going to have an effect on your spirituality. If you want to grow spiritually, you need to develop this habit of giving food to the poor. And believe me, brothers and sisters, you know, a lot of youth today, they suffer, they feel depressed, they have anxiety, they feel this internal disturbance. You know, one of the best ways to feel better, to feel at peace, is to go and feed people. Wallah, the pleasure that you will experience when you go feed hungry people, it's greater than anything that you go and buy at the mall. You know, sometimes we try to fill the emptiness by buying things, because we think that things and shoes and handbags and these fancy clothes, they're going to fill that emptiness. But you know what fills that emptiness? Serving Allah's creation, giving. And then the Prophet mentions, as we're approaching the time of Salah, he mentions water. Water. You know, today, in the most developed country in the world, the United States, there are people who live in Flint, Michigan. You know about the crisis in Michigan. Flint, Michigan. They are, and the irony of ironies is that they are surrounded by the Great Lakes. There is more fresh water in that region than any region in the world. But the people, because many of them are from the African American community, because our politicians, they don't care about people from the black community. They drink poisoned water. We as a Muslim community, we have to do something about this. We might not be able to solve the problem, but don't you think it would be good as a community, as Al-Fatemah Islamic Center, that as a community we make a contribution to those who are living in Flint, and we help buy filtration systems as a community. There's a lot of thawab in giving water to people. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you know what he used to do in his spare time? You know, you and I, what do we do in our spare time? We gossip and we watch Netflix. This is how we spend our time, for hours. No, there's nothing wrong with watching Netflix, but some of us, instead of Salatul Layl, we have Salatul Netflix, right? We just watch until the morning. Amir al-Mu'mineen, what did he used to do in his spare time? He used to dig wells. He used to dig wells. Where? In the desert. Do you know how deep you have to dig to strike water in the desert? Why would he do that? Because he wanted people, when they're traveling through the harsh deserts, to have resting stations so they can drink water. This was the ibadah of Ali ibn Abi Talib. There's a hadith from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, la sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, where he says, إِذَا كَثُرَتْ ذُنُوبُكَ. If you have a lot of sins, and some of us, we've accumulated many sins, you know, especially if you don't make tawbah, you think the sins are just going to disappear? The Prophet says, the one who has committed many sins, if you have committed many sins, فَاسْقِ الْمَاءَ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. Earn the forgiveness of Allah by giving water to people. Giving water to people. There's a lot of reward in this. In fact, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, in another tradition, he says, إِنَّ أَوَّلَ مَا يُبْدَأُ بِهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ صَدَقَةُ الْمَاءِ. Imam al-Baqir says, on the day of judgment, the first act of righteousness that will be rewarded is giving water to people. So in the month of Ramadan, give cups of water to people. Quench people's thirst. So the Prophet, he mentions drinkable water as a human right. This was when? 14 centuries ago. You know, in 2010, listen to this. In 2010, which was how long ago? Less than a decade. The United Nations, they passed a resolution to declare that drinkable water is a human right. It's about time, yes? 2010, they finally realized that drinkable, clean, drinkable water is a human right. In 2009, you know what triggered this resolution? In 2009, the World Health Federation, the World Health Organization, they found that every day, 24,000 children die because of diseases related to drinking contaminated water. Every day, 24,000. Each child, this is a mother that's suffering, a family that has lost a child. What are we doing as a community about this? So maybe we need to factor into our masjid budgets, you know, if we want Allah to bring barakah to our centers, that we need to apportion some of the money that we bring in to helping the wider community. And you know, that resolution that passed in 2010, 120 countries voted in favor of that resolution to declare drinkable water as a human right. There were some countries that abstained. No country said no, because of course that's bad for your public image. But about 20 countries abstained, meaning they didn't vote. Do you know who those countries were? The United States, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and other European countries. They voted against. So their silence was basically their opposition to passing a resolution that recognizes drinkable water as a human right. Why? In the report it mentions that there was a representative from the UK that said, off the record, but apparently they caught it on the record. He said, we're not going to spend money on toilets in Africa. These are the people who are running the world today. They have no compassion. Wallah, they have no rahmah. The countries that abstained, they present themselves as the world leaders. We need people who have the ethics and the morality that was taught by the Ahlul Bayt. The humanity of Ahlul Bayt. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the 10th of Muharram, he gave water to the horses that were being ridden by the enemies that came to kill him. This was Imam al-Hussein. In the Battle of Siffin, when Muawiyah prevented Ali ibn Abi Talib and his army from drinking water, the Imam alayhi salam fought, and when they gained control of the river, some of the companions of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, they said, okay, oh Ali, now we can prevent them from drinking. Since they did it to us, now it's payback. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib says, no, this is the difference between Ali and Muawiyah. That's the difference. And there has to be a difference between us, the Shia of Ali, and other people. It's sad, wallah, it's a tragedy that you have non-Muslims who don't have role models like Ahlul Bayt, and they are at the forefront of battling climate change. They're at the forefront of building wells. They're at the forefront of solving the homeless problem. Where are the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib? What are we doing? You know what we're doing? We're fighting with each other. Instead of solving problems, we're at each other's throats. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the tawfiq to be agents of goodness, to lift the standard of living of those who live in our communities. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the tawfiq to do that which is pleasing to Him. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.